Hello and welcome to the Uncharted Algorithm podcast. In today's episode, we have a special guest, May Habib, the CEO and co-founder of Writer, a leading generative AI platform built specifically for enterprises. Welcome, May. May, you have an impressive background. You grew up in Lebanon, graduated from Harvard, you worked at Lehman Brothers and Mubadala before diving into AI and NLP, specifically with a startup called Cordova. So tell us a little bit more about your journey and what made you dive into becoming a startup founder, and specifically why AI and NLP.
Yeah. So I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. Entrepreneurs by, you know, um, circumstance versus by choice, in that they couldn't really get any other job. So very similar to other immigrant stories. But um, I knew I wanted to start something big. Not a mom and pop. And um, the the kind of finance and sovereign wealth fund years were definitely a detour from that. But funnily enough, um, in the sovereign wealth fund period, I worked on semiconductors and investing in semiconductors and researched a little company called NVIDIA at the time. So, in so many ways, everything I've done has led me here. And I really connected with my co-founder, Waseem, when we first met more than 10 years ago now on language problems. I was really fascinated by the just kind of social inequities that arise from folks just speaking different languages. And we initially partnered to build a machine translation company and discovered and started using transformers during those years building up the localization startup. And once we saw it, we couldn't unsee it. What would happen to language generation? And we called it source language at the time, English. We are now in 32 languages, so life really has come full circle as writer, but using enormously different techniques to get there, and it is very cool. What role semiconductors and Moore's law and compute has really played in that journey. So I do feel like I've had a very holistic career, lots of different parts supporting one another.
Mhm.
But definitely didn't necessarily feel like that, while in it.
So, what made you from Cordova to Writer, moving from, as you said, content localization and management to specifically a Gen AI platform, which Writer is? And we'll talk more about that. But could you share a journey specifically? I'm mainly interested in viewing this from a AI founder lens. Or
Yeah, sure.
yeah, that.
Yeah. So we had to start a new company. And the reason for that is, even though the skills and the people, on the product and AI side were the same folks, the product we felt needed to be completely different. You just could not do both, like the beginning of that problem, right? Writing the source content and the translation part of the problem at the same time. And now it is absolutely obvious, why even transcreation, in a generative AI based environment. So we do people use our platform for transcreation. We don't do localization, right? And we're very clear about that, especially that we serve compliance oriented industries. Translation is still like absolutely a must. If you absolutely need, an insurance policy in 6 languages that says exactly the same thing. So all to say that when we were in it, really trying to make the decision of, are we going to incorporate generative AI into the localization business, or are we starting a brand new business? There were even so many more thornier and hairier issues that we couldn't have even anticipated that we would have faced had we continued on the path that we were on. In a lot of ways, I think, we early, and we weren't massive, we were single digit revenues, mid single digits, about 50 people. Um, Starting a new company was obviously the right choice, especially now that I see so many products, whether it's the customer service space or the marketing space, even, systems of record. that are building Gen AI into their applications that see very poor adoption of the Gen AI features, right? People aren't there in your app for that. And so you just got to be, as an AI founder, super thoughtful about and honest with the actual change management and activation energy required to get people to do the thing you want them to do. And, if it's bolted on to something else, it's just going to be so much less likely. So, there were sort of gut decisions that played into, this is a fork in the road that I think are even starker in retrospect.
Wonderful. So, what is a writer's core mission? And how do you see Gen AI transforming enterprises? In general, I would say.
Yeah. Our mission and vision is to transform work. And what we saw when we started Writer a few years ago, and why the company is called Writer, is that AI was going to get better at people at reading and writing, certainly faster. And all three of those things have happened. And the company is still called Writer because the natural language interface, right, to AI is English. And if you can write it, you can build it. I mean, that is the world we are going in and soon. And it's just been extraordinary to watch builders, non-technical builders, right? From both tech companies, your Salesforce, your NVIDIAs, to non-tech companies, your Vanguards, your L'Oreals, who are really diving in, understanding the technology, understanding the building blocks, and really transforming work. And I don't mean something that used to take me an hour now takes me a minute. I'm saying something that used to take us 4 months now takes 4 weeks, right? Like true orchestration and reinvention with AI at the heart. That's really what we are about. And there is kind of automation 1.0 that was, and I used to be a bookkeeper in high school. So I did a lot of this, automation 1.0, taking an invoice and punching it in and that being automated, right? That's really task-based automation. What we're able to do now, what our customers can do now on the Writer platform is large-scale work orchestration and knowledge work orchestration, stuff that used to be done cross-app, cross-functionally across months, right now really at that those processes completely rebuilt. And those are the building blocks that we have built. It is a platform that we call a fully integrated full stack generative AI platform. And this is what we think, enterprise generative AI is just going to look like. It's a large language model with built-in RAG that makes it very easy to plug into structured and unstructured data, very easy to do the continuous data management that you need for those RAG pipelines to continue to be relevant, right? And scalable, because you want to build 50 apps a quarter, not 3 apps a year. And again, these apps not be kind of like little narrow substitutions, but true, collapsing of work. So that's what the product enables. On top of the LLM and RAG are reusable AI guardrails. So everything from brand to compliance to things that you want to audit for your own responsible AI strategies, et cetera. And then the ability to basically create wrappers around that technology. So easy to build interfaces. You can use the Writer product to host your apps or embed them into your workflows and other tools. So that's what we call an enterprise generative AI platform today. We certainly have got lots of competition. It is new, dynamic, and fast moving. So it's a very confused buyer today. But we can come in with a very differentiated path to fast ROI and really deep, meaningful transformation.
I would love to dive into some of the product details and especially
Yeah.
the RAG aspect of it. Get to that, but before that, um, I wanted to just look at the bigger picture for a little bit more. Um, I was listening to a Y Combinator podcast recently, and they were saying that they're actually seeing within this recent batch that they had in winter 2024, they notice a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm. A lot of it is around AI, and they genuinely feel that there's a big platform shift happening. Um, Something like what happened from mobile a few years ago, maybe a decade or so ago. May the PC platform shift. Do you feel that as well as, again, as a fast growing AI startup CEO, as you talk to customers, is there a big platform shift happening from your vantage point?
I love that so many folks in the enterprises we talk to are learning, you know, how to be an AI dev. It today doesn't require for simple like zero shot, calls to LLMs. It doesn't require the kind of NLP know-how that it used to require for a lot of use cases. For the use cases that we focus on, there is just such a need to just very crisply understand and integrate with the data that's used for retrieval because the accuracy requirements are so high. We're talking healthcare and financial services. And so the thing that you sometimes see is folks confusing a platform shift and the need to learn new platform skills with the requirement to need to rebuild the platform. And I do think that is a mark of just the kind of early yet to mature part of this space. But absolutely, AI as a medium, AI as clay is very exciting, and it's not even the A, it's intelligence, right? Like going back to the capabilities really being human level already. What would you build if intelligence were not a constraint? Is a very interesting question for a company, but still they're finding it really hard. Like you would think that you could easily build a data product now, over like the vast unstructured data that you sit on if you are, let's say, a custodian bank, but that's still very much an old school product management problem, right? And so yes, there has definitely been a platform shift and new platform skills, but there's just no getting out of the fact that, the way that we build products and the way you get users to use them and buy them, I don't think that has fundamentally changed, right? With the introduction of human level intelligence, being essentially free.
Yeah, no, that's well said. In terms of what type of problems that you're trying to solve for your customers, what are some of the main real world day to day challenges that you see enterprises using Gen AI for? And I'm also curious how many enterprises are doing POCs, versus actually applying Gen AI in production.
Yeah. Yeah. I love knowledge management use cases and agent assist use cases, but it would be very easy to take even those families of use cases very shallowly, um, pulling up a, customer record or being able to query against a knowledge base, right? Um, those are good use cases. They're not transformational, right? But I'll give you an example of a transformational use case. You've got a call center that costs you 4 to 5 billion a year because there are 10,000 people that sit in it, right? You're a financial institution. And it used to be that folks calling in to figure out whether, they could take a loan out against their 401k needed to go to a specialist. And it added 8 minutes, right, to the initial call in addition to the specialist call. Well, if you could actually really quickly and intelligently help that first agent, right, support that customer, that's a real transformation, right? If you are a wealth management company and you've got a set of support agents, it's going to get really weird with agentic AI and so many agents, human agents, in these use cases. But you've got a call center where very experienced wealth advisors are calling in to ask about products. This is kind of internal support, right? Um, and it is like a 25-year-old answering the phone. And there is like a real kind of like cultural mismatch, right? In this exchange that hurts the company's brand
Yeah.
and costs the company money because, like, they're calling in 3 or 4 times because they can't figure it out. Those are the types of like really deep transformations that are that are possible. And then, in the kind of digital marketing space, like in CPG and retail, these are incredibly powerful use cases and acceleration and time to market. Like we're talking 3x faster, right? To get your Maybelline out, to get your Tylenol out, brands that we work with. It's just an incredible pace of change. But what's behind it, right, is humans doing really hard lifting. To get to your second point, Aditya, around, are they POCs or are they scaling? There are three big mountains you got to scale to scale. The first is quality. Like, if your app is dumb as hell, it's not going anywhere. If it can't be smart at scale, if it can't be smart over time, if there's no way to like keep it fresh, everyone is going to like have very high expectations. And if you can't maintain the quality of how the app works, it's just going to be really hard to be successful or to have confidence that this can scale. So that's the first mountain. Once people scale that, and few companies have climbed that mountain, once people have climbed that mountain, they face another mountain around like compliance and risk. And even after the first set approvals to even get the first POC out, we're starting to notice people not wanting to be the last person to have said yes, right? And so a new gate gets introduced. And that is, a whole other set of people and process challenges. And then the third big mountain, in terms of scaling POCs, really is, I think, a inaction, or maybe more positively said, the courage that it requires to switch shit off. So, headcount that we thought we needed that we didn't, restructuring that now has to happen, reskilling that now has to happen. Um, you know, moving agencies out, moving contractors out, restructuring those agreements. So, we're still sort of like, oh, the POCs don't scale. Most people, because it's a quality problem, but there are other problems waiting. So we're going to be working our way through this for a long time.
Interesting that people processes are coming kind of to the fore in this sort of,
Now,
and you discuss kind of in a way, it's a platform shift happening, but there's a culture aspect to it and a human aspect to it.
yeah.
Interesting. Um, so in terms of, you talked about metrics for a bit. I noticed you mentioned a few metrics. So I guess one other question I had as you were speaking was, in terms of the, if you look at the overall landscape of all these companies and the use cases, what percentage, again, just very broad numbers I'm looking for, what percentage of these are sort of internal facing versus external customer facing? Any sense of that?
We build almost nothing that is customer facing. Um, if you're a global brand, let's say you are in the hair business, your users don't want to talk to an AI stylist on your website. It's a graveyard of apps like that nobody uses, that help people check the AI box. Um, and so for commercial reasons, um, and also like maybe first principle reasons, those are things that we don't touch. We don't build conversational AI bots for websites. We don't do pricing models. We don't do mortgages. We're not interested in stuff where there isn't going to be a human in the loop. And so, the body of use cases that you choose to focus on, I mean, it really determines the kind of company you end up building, the kind of product you end up building. And that's why I'm so bullish on this space. And, the whole media wants everybody to believe that hyperscalers are going to invest their way to like absolute domination. Like there is just a whole universe of work in the last mile that hyperscalers will never get to touching. And there's a lot of building that needs to happen because, we're not going to focus on all the use cases or even all the verticals or even all the sub verticals. And so there's a lot of other companies to be built. And, it is, I think, just the reality once you get really deep in with customers that their needs are very specific.
Talking a little bit about how these use cases emerge, I was just curious, do they emerge from the customers themselves? I guess it is a spectrum, but in general, I was just curious, is there a trend that you're seeing where you are having to go in and kind of work almost like as a McKinsey or a consulting uh, project to carve out these use cases, because a lot of these are not obvious, right? These Gen AI use cases are not very obvious.
Yeah.
So just curious how you see
Yeah.
that.
So, we're a product company. So anything that we do needs to be productizable. For us, the unit of productization gets more and more refined the deeper we get into a vertical and the more comfortable and more repetitions we get on families of use cases. And so we build solution maps for a vertical before we let sales loose on it, and it is a distillation of sometimes hundreds of conversations, sometimes hundreds of different apps people have built on the platform and experimented with. But it essentially says to customers, this is where the gold is, and this is what generative AI is really good at, and these are like high business impact use cases. And, some of these numbers are so crazy in terms of ROI that we pare it down a lot because, like, no CIO is going to believe 50x ROI. They have been burned so many times, but that's what we're seeing, right? And so you soft pedal it a bit and really get very practical. We challenge ourselves not to say generative AI in pitches. Like, that's when you're having a real conversation with somebody. So, the use cases are are specific, you know, with a lot of respect to the consultancies, they're not getting this specific.
So you're getting the customers to work with these with your platform, with the LLMs, and with the data that they have, and then attack specific problems that they're facing, and then from that exercise something emerges, which makes sense. Is that
Well,
an accurate
we
thing?
come in with a thesis, Aditya, for sure. So we come in with a thesis where it's like, in asset management, the
Mhm.
big areas are, everything's a three, right? One, two, three. These are like the big solution sets. Um, and you do have a conversation. You're not forcing yourself on the customer. They're telling you stuff, but you are helping them really see, mistakes that others have made before them. And so it's very important that our go-to-market team, have a real depth of understanding of the industry they're serving and can talk customer, because the magic isn't when they learn how to use our building blocks, although that is very magical. It's when we can together diagram out a workflow and then build an app that actually can mimic and collapse that workflow. And we do have to understand a lot of it. We do have to interview a lot of people. So, from a like data ingestion, does it look like strategy and consulting? Yes. Have we done it a lot before so we can collapse it in a half a day and not 2 months? Yes. But we've built a collaborative platform for business users and engineers to collaborate on this very thing of last mile data, last mile workflow, last mile annotation. And so, that is where the quality comes from. And in the kind of methodology from there, it is very much about, essentially building the scaffolding for how you're going to engage with the customer as a platform and on an ongoing basis, right? In those initial discovery conversations and initial workshops.
Mhm. Talking a little bit more about the technology, I was specifically interested in the RAG aspect of it. You have a knowledge graph based RAG system on your platform. What are your thoughts on RAG in general? I know there's a lot of talk, a lot of excitement about it. There's a lot of excitement about large context, models as well. Um, What's your view on how this is going to play out, especially from an enterprise context?
Yeah. Large context windows are not a solution to retrieval use case problems. Um, they are amazing for the kind of like more open ended and generative types of use cases, but where you are really trying to do work across data sets and looking for insights that live between and across documents, um, that is not a solution to, high 90s kind of accuracy. That's what we've seen. I mean, we've got really big context windows too, but there is not a, substitution of that for graph-based RAG in retrieval use cases. So what we've done for retrieval use cases is train a separate LLM basically to build nodes and edges on folks' data in a use case specific way. And so you get a much higher accuracy rate as a result of just having much denser understanding of the data, much richer relationships and context to draw on. And so, that has been a real breath of fresh air for customers to like, they can sometimes feel pretty disillusioned in building applications that are wrong, 6 times out of 10, or that don't work once it even goes up to 20 documents, or that need like full-time data people monitoring and looking at the data for the accuracy to be usable. So we've built a whole GUI around it as well. So business users can update files. Like the continuous data management here is really important, or update connections depending on, where the connectors are. So it's a really essential part of getting the engineering right. And, it used to be once a month, then once a week, now once a day. We hear it took me months of experimenting with, insert model and hyperscaler X here, and I got it to work in Writer in 2 days. That's the kind of thing we wanna see, because the the cumulative effects of everybody building AI that works and that gets used, building 50 generative AI applications a quarter and not 3 shitty ones a year, it makes a really big difference to the culture and how leaned in people are, how many business people want to work on AI, and then how you end up climbing those other two mountains, right? Like, okay, this stuff works, it's good, and we know how to scale it. We've got now the activation energy we need to solve the people and process problems.
Got it. So you have your own Palmyra model that you built. When was that decision made? Was it right at the start that you'd said, okay, well, let's just do our own LLM? And I also had a question around you have a closed source version, which is the 72V model, and the open source as well. But maybe the first question was around what made you decide on your own model?
Um, so it was a really important decision for the company, and we made it before ChatGPT, came out on the scene, and um, of course, like folks who weren't really sure what was under the hood at Writer were very curious, including our own investors, that we were investing in our own, because 18 months ago that was pretty contrarian. Now, every generative AI company out of Y Combinator is building their own models, and for us, like that investment in like keeping the training data up to date and doing the vertical specific models and, the instruct and the chat versions of the models, et cetera, is one that we decided to make, because the ability for us to serve applications that are at the deterministic level that like enterprise need, right? And the consistency, it's just impossible when you are hooking up to a closed source model, somebody else's closed model. There's nothing you can't control to your customer. And so for us, it was really a no brainer. we're an ML company. We had been working with transformers since before anybody was doing it, and we just never felt like we weren't up to the task and the challenge. And our models are up there on the leaderboards, and we open source kind of the lagging ones, and the most powerful models we make very transparent to our enterprise customers, obviously under NDA, et cetera. But the training data, just the methodology, like all of our policies around how we treat like the customer interactions with the model, all of that is transparent and auditable. And, especially in a world where the RFPs and the responsible AI work and the EU AI Act are all really leaning into, models that are fair for commercial use and aren't going to get folks into trouble. We can just answer depth of inquiry in a way that we couldn't even with open source models, right? Like other people's open source models. And a lot of these enterprises are working with open source models that they themselves can't scale, right? Because like they themselves aren't meeting kind of the bar for internal AI security has gotten. So, um, again, sort of like the decision to even start Writer, a one that has proven to make even more sense in retrospect. I guess that's what the definition of a good decision is. Um, but actually felt pretty obvious even in making it.
Yeah, it seems to be working out for you pretty well. And as you said, it's already on the leaderboard, doing pretty well. I saw on the benchmarks. On the benchmarks itself, do you see that there's a dearth of sort of good benchmarks specifically for enterprise use cases, or are the current ones good enough? Or what's your thought on
Yeah,
that?
it's such a good question, Aditya. I 100% think that we need new benchmarks and benchmarking companies. And, the Stanford team is working on it, I think, and are most ahead. They certainly need everybody's help, right? And, what use cases folks are leaning into and actually finding value in really determines, I think, the benchmarks, because what you're really looking for is what model behaviors are best suited for what types of use cases, right? And in our AI studio, when you're building an app in Writer, there's a model drop down and you can choose between 18 of our models. Now, you get a lot of help. So depending on the use case, folks know, which type of model is required from vision to instruct to chat. Um, and different models that have got different context window sizes. Again, there are different trade-offs and different types of um, uh, uh, um, use cases that are best suited for that. So that's what folks need help with. There are 1,500 LLMs. If LLMs were the blanket answer to everybody's AI dreams, everyone would have the AI
Mm.
program of their dr- of their dreams. You know what I mean? Inside their companies, and we don't have that. And so, the model benchmarks are powerful, but I think are going to be seen as crude compared to what is going to come.
Talking a little bit about these AI stack or the LLM stack in specific, how do you see that evolving um, from your vantage point? Again, you have a sort of uh, a full stack solution that you're offering. There's lots of activity happening in various parts of the stack, specifically from tooling. There's obviously verticalization startups. There's other platform companies. There's hyperscalers you mentioned. Uh, Overall, where do you see it evolving in the next 12 to 24 months? Where are the opportunities? Where is the consolidation happening?
Mm, yeah, good question. Um, I do think there'll be some consolidation for sure. I think we've realized nobody wants to build their own LLM. Enterprise doesn't want to build their own LLMs, right? So I think there's a whole host of companies built on the premise that enterprises will be building their own LLMs at scale. Um, there are companies built on the premise that fine tuning will be huge, right? And we do very little fine tuning today. The majority of the use cases are, it's chained prompt engineering, it's example writing, and it is kind of tuning. and choosing the right behavior of the model, its retrieval, versus fine tuning. So, again, I think like some will survive, but it's not going to be, it'll be a cottage industry, not a big market on its own. Um, and then, from the hyperscalers perspective and the folks that are building generative AI adjacencies, I think AI attached to a lot of different structured data types makes a ton of sense, right? Generative AI and assistants and being able to chat with databases, like that's a market, and it's probably a market that lives inside of a database company versus being a separate company. So, um, do I think that chatting with anything outside of like your actual CRM data is going to be a big business at Salesforce? Probably not, right? And so I do think there are folks who will probably retreat on some of the AI functionality that they're pitching. I mean, there are kind of system of record companies that are out there pitching building domain specific LLMs to customers. I think there's a lot of grasping at straws in the EPD teams of the large tech companies trying to figure out where the AI generative AI revenue is, and I think folks will, um, you know, retrench to stick to like really exciting, powerful features that are closer to what their systems do today.
Mhm. Right. I wanted to touch upon the people process aspect. One question I had was around, yeah, I mean, I do a little bit of consulting for clients on the Gen AI side. I've noticed a lot of them, while they're very sort of excited, there's sort of a nervous anticipation and fear as well. So mixed feelings, I guess, when they actually start playing around with some of these models and seeing what it's capable of. You yourself mentioned about sort of the amazing sort of unbelievable ROIs that you see yourself, and you kind of downplay it. Um, uh, so the question I wanted to ask was, a lot of them, I sense that they fear for their own jobs or the jobs of the team that they're leading. So there's sort of this really uncomfortable, nervous anticipation in some sense that I
Yeah.
guess. Do you see that as well? And how do you handle that, this human element to this technology as you try and with customers?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I feel like sometime last fall, it became very uncool to talk about job loss associated with AI. So you really shut up about it. But the fear has not gone away. And outside of AI, yes, the major layoffs are done. But nobody's on a hiring spree, and it has been normalized to trim a few percentage of your workforce. People don't even write about it anymore. Um, and so I do think the fear is becoming entrenched. And I was on with a CIO yesterday, Fortune 100 pharma company, and there is like a operation leader inside of their company that literally nobody can talk to, like will not talk about modernization, digitization, AI at all, right? And look, if we continue on this track of like super high revenue per employee, companies can actually decide like which parts of their business they're just going to keep analog, because that's how those people want to work. And I think there's a beauty in being able to decide, what you keep old school and what you bring AI into. um, it used to be that I used to say AI is for the repetitive, the drudgery, those team workflows nobody wants to touch, But now the reality is one person's drudgery, it's another person's creativity. AI is good at all of it. And so, like, I'll do what I love doing, analog, and I'll write AI tooling to do the rest, right? I think that's a lot more what work looks like in the coming years. And being able to democratize the ability to work with free intelligence, right? That's what we're trying to make happen. And hopefully, and we see this in our customers, those users get very excited about learning those skills because those skills are transferable. They're the skills of the future. And we see it as our responsibility to make sure that, best efforts, like no user left behind. We're going to workshop and AI day and like office hours our way to mass adoption at your company. That's our promise,
Great,
right?
great. Um, so towards the end of, I guess, the podcast, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the entrepreneurship aspect. As a founder, you've navigated pivots, fundraising, challenges of you're currently in the middle of scaling a startup in the growth stage, in the scaling phase. So, what have been some of the toughest moments in this journey, and how did you cultivate the resilience to push through some of these?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Aditya. I always had like folks in my family, my best friends, my husband, who, you know, in the days where, and it's been a long time since I was like truly unsure, but early days of writer, are we a consumer company? Are we prosumer? Are we going to do this enterprise thing? I was really torn up about that. And then in what felt to me like an abandonment, of our translation mission. There were like very deeply personal reasons why I was um, in that space, and choosing to focus on English felt like selling out a bit. Now we're in 32 languages, so like okay, I can breathe a little, but that also felt like a pretty tortured decision, and you're raising money, and there's all sorts of like existential things that have not always been obvious, what the next step should be. So I always had people around me that were like, "Come on, you're having fun, you know, toughen up, suck it up, take the next step." Um, no one who was ever like, "Oh, this is a lot of work, May. What a sacrifice." I never had somebody who like who did that. So and that's probably me knowing what I needed mentally and surrounding myself with folks. Um, and then my co-founder, I mean, like we have an infinite trust battery. Like I say that all the time, and with a strong co-founder, like when they're down, you're up. When they're up, you're down. Like, you kind of like nothing is ever very bad and nothing's ever amazing. And that is just has always been a amazing partnership that we have had. It's been a very creative partnership. He runs EPD, I run go to market together. We do product vision and product. And he knows a ton about customers, and I know a ton about ML and the AI we do. So, it's spheres of responsibility, but we are like really deeply understanding and involved in all aspects of the business. And so it's just a very tight partnership, and we like giving people visibility into like the tension in our relationship too. So we think out loud with each other. We think very differently. And it's almost practiced, not practiced, but like we don't avoid um, showing kind of conflicting points of view, and arguing in front of the team. Like, we want people to see that that is perfectly acceptable. We don't run things by each other before we talk about it with the team or with leaders. It's not like mom and dad decide and then bring it to everybody. Like, um, we want to demonstrate that um, what's possible when you have deep trust with somebody, how much you can challenge each other.
Is there a good book that you can recommend for anybody who's trying to build a startup and again scale it?
Yeah, there are a couple that I love. I love The CEO Within by Matt Mushari. I've never met him, but it is a really it's really helped me. Um, and then I love the 10 Principles of Conscious Leadership. Can't remember the author. I can send it to you. But
Yeah.
yeah, both those books, plus Amp It Up by Frank Slootman, a classic. Um, I also love The Mirando Method by Mitch Mirando. Hi, Mitch, if you're listening. That has always been kind of a touchstone. You know, um, those books have been pretty like perennially around my desks, and I'll consult every once in a while.
And last question, how do you personally stay engaged with the latest advancements in AI? I know you have busy schedule, you're meeting customers, growing the company. Um, so how do you maintain the curiosity, creativity to to drive a writer in the first place?
Yeah. Well, I don't do any personal social media. So all of my free kind of in between time, Twitter. Twitter is the best way to read all the latest research and see all the latest demos. And um, me and my co-founder probably exchange, 15 DMs a day on Twitter. So kind of a running conversation. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's my favorite way. Our team publishes, and I join those conversations. And it is a very applied, uh, driven program. So the problems that we see with customers and that like we run into with accuracy and trying to get stuff to work, we're solving real problems, not theoretical ones.
Yeah. Wonderful. I appreciate your time I made today. It was a great conversation, learned a lot, and thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you, Aditya. Super thoughtful questions today.
Cheers.